Last week, the White House finally confirmed that United States President Donald Trump would indeed be making his first Southeast Asia voyage since taking office in January, with stops in Vietnam and the Philippines to attend regional summits as part of a broader Asia trip in November. Though Mr. Trump's attendance at these meetings next month is itself an important symbolic indicator of his administration's commitment to Southeast Asia, he and his team will also need to address some substantive concerns around U.S. policy as he prepares for his first ASEAN trip. Contrary to some of the doomsday scenarios painted by some at the outset, Mr. Trump's record on Southeast Asia so far has been more mixed. Worrying initial moves like the withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership (TPP) trade pact were followed by quick and robust engagement of key allies and partners, including White House visits granted for the leaders of Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand and Singapore so far. Yet as Mr. Trump touches down in Southeast Asian capitals next month, the bigger question he and his team will have to address beyond these individual developments is what, if anything, they all add up to in terms of the administration's approach to this sub-region and how it fits into its broader foreign policy. The question is a fair one. With so much uncertainty still lingering over everything from key senior personnel to the shape of the administration's domestic agenda, it is difficult to predict with any kind of certainty where Washington will end up in terms of its regional approach. This is particularly true with respect to Southeast Asia, which has traditionally occupied a marginal position in wider U.S. global strategy. President Donald Trump's trip to Asia is an important symbolic indicator of his administration's commitment to the region, the writer says, adding that Mr. Trump's record on Southeast Asia so far has been more mixed. Photo Reuters. Though it is still early days, what we have seen so far also leaves much to be desired. On the economic side, by hastily withdrawing from the TPP so early on and signaling a strong protectionist stance, the Trump administration has missed a valuable opportunity for the United States to engage the sub-region and left a huge void that it has yet to fill. Administration officials continue to insist that there are legitimate issues of fairness and trade that need to be addressed candidly with Southeast Asian states, and that there might be other ways to preserve the gains made through TPP, including through several bilateral deals. But that misses the broader point. By framing economic issues in a bilateral, transactional way, the Trump administration is sending a message to the region that it is thinking small, just as Beijing is beginning to think bigger. To be sure, one should not exaggerate the extent of U.S.-China rivalry or overstate the prospects for grand China schemes like the Belt and Road Initiative. Yet, Washington's failure to follow through on initiatives of its own severely undercuts its ability to compete with China or criticize some Southeast Asian states for selling out to Beijing. On the security side, to be fair, regionally there has been much more continuity than the rhetoric might suggest. Indeed, on some issues like counterterrorism and maritime security, there has actually been an acceleration of ongoing U.S. efforts with allies and partners, including Vietnam and the Philippines, which Mr. Trump will look to build on during his stops there. Yet concerns lie elsewhere. The war of words Mr. Trump has started with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has unnecessarily increased the risk of miscalculation between Washington and Pyongyang. Meanwhile, wild swings in U.S.-China policy so far have made it difficult for smaller Southeast Asian states to read how these big power dynamics will actually affect them. These developments are a reminder that even though Mr. Trump has carved out time in his schedule for regional summitry in Southeast Asia as the United States and ASEAN commemorate 40 years of partnership this year, his administration has not quite found its footing in Northeast Asia, which he will look to do with his stops in Seoul and Beijing. Added to this is the fear that the Trump administration, in confronting security threats such as the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, ISIS or Iran, could once again become embroiled in a quagmire in another region that will take some of the U.S. attention away from Southeast Asia, and Asia more generally, as we have seen repeatedly since the end of the Cold War. On democracy and human rights, the Trump team has been relatively quiet so far, even as the regional outlook got bleaker. Though U.S. agencies continue to routinely address issues as they come up, from the Rohingya crisis in Myanmar to the democratic crackdown in Cambodia, the lack of White House attention in this area has been clear, even though it may be unsurprising, given Mr. Trump's own issues in this area. That silence might be a relief for some Southeast Asian states that have long grown weary of Washington sermonizing. And it has certainly allowed the Trump administration to make some inroads with regional states that even the Obama administration shied away from, as evidenced by the White House receptions that Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha and Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak both got. Yet not finding the right balance on rights soon would be a mistake. It will leave the administration vulnerable to criticism and open the door to other actors within the U.S. foreign policy-making process, particularly Congress, to either limit or complicate bilateral ties. The risk of this will only grow next month with Mr. Trump's stops in Vietnam and the Philippines, both of which have already registered concerns on this score. Of course, it is still early days. It is worth remembering that it took nearly 2 years for a conventional, functional Obama administration to get its so-called Asia rebalance strategy publicly rolled out, and that similar concerns existed at the outset on issues ranging from China to trade. Expecting a rather unconventional and somewhat dysfunctional Trump administration to have clear answers on its Southeast Asia policy in less than a year might be a bit premature. But that will not prevent the questions from being asked as Mr. Trump makes his first ASEAN voyage next month. The writer is associate editor of The Diplomat magazine based in Washington, D.C., and a doctoral candidate at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, researching Asian security issues and U.S. foreign policy in the Asia-Pacific. SEA View is a weekly column on Southeast Asian affairs.